Welcome back to Breakfast Central. Now we unpack the outcomes of a major continental gathering, the 11th Public Accounts Conference hosted by Nigeria's House of Representatives. Over 300 lawmakers, auditors and fiscal experts from across West Africa converged in the nation's capital, Abuja, to confront one of the region's most pressing challenges: public debt oversight and financial accountability.
The event, organized by the Public Accounts Committee, PAC, of the House of Representatives, kicked off on Monday and ends today in the nation's capital, Abuja, with the program focused on the theme, Strengthening Parliamentary Oversight of Public Debt. The role of Finance and Public Accounts Committees aimed at empowering Public Accounts Committees and Finance Committees across West Africa to promote transparency, fiscal discipline, and debt sustainability in the interest of citizens. Joining us for this discussion is the federal lawmaker representing the Ede North, Ede South, Egbedore Federal Constituency of Osun State, who is also the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee at Nigeria's House of Representatives, Honourable Bamidele Salam. Good morning and thanks for being here with us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Good morning, Nigerians. Good morning to the whole world.
All right. It's been a busy week, I must say, especially from when the entire event kicked off. But let's start off with a few questions. First off, can you bring us up to speed on how the WAPAC conference is going? And can you also shed more light on the impact it's had so far so good in the past few hours or days?
Okay, thank you very much. The 11th Annual Conference and General Assembly of the West African Association of Public Account Committees, WAPAC, kicked off on Monday, like you said earlier on. It's an annual event which brings together the public account committees of Parliament in West Africa, as well as development partners, auditors generals, accountants, and sister parliamentary bodies from some other sub-region. And Nigeria is fortunate this year to be the host. It's the first time that Nigeria is hosting this conference since 2009, when WAPAC was established. It started on Monday, declared open by the Honourable Speaker of the House of Representatives, and we had a keynote address by the Minister of Finance and the Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Dr. Wale Edu. Participants from 13 countries were actively involved in the conference, as well as representatives of the East African and Southern African bloc of the Public Account Committee. Now, as you may know, the Public Account Committee is that committee in the Parliament that deals with the report of the Auditor General, the Supreme Audit Institution of each of these countries. And it's a global practice that the Public Account Committee exists as a constitutional committee of parliament in virtually every parliament around the world. So this is the 11th edition of the conference, like I said. And in the last couple of days, from Monday till now, we have had a very interesting, deep engagement with people from the academics, from the civil society, from the media, from the accounting profession, from the debt management office, from the World Bank, from the Southern African Public Account Committee Association, and a few other organizations have come together to discuss a very important subject matter, which is the issue of debt in West Africa and Africa as a whole, and how the Parliament should come in to ensure that our debts are sustainable, our debts are also functional, that the purpose of borrowing is actually to grow the economies of each of our countries, to empower the people, and to ensure that, whatever terms, repayment terms, are included in clauses by borrowing, by the lending nations, are such that are competitive and, not destructive to the overall objective of having the debt. And members of the public account committees from these West African countries and our partners from other parts have engaged very deeply, learning from one another, as well as putting up a new framework that can guide us to be more efficient, more effective in the discharge of our duties in each of the participating parliament. It's been very engaging. Today is the final day, and today what we're having is a training for the clerks of the Public Account and Finance Committees of West African States, which is starting any moment from now.
Now, Honourable Bamidele Salam, like you rightly said in your opening statement, the role your committees play across nations is very, very important. Now, the conference is themed Strengthening Parliamentary Oversight of Public Debt. But when we bring it back home in Nigeria, it's almost like everything, especially in this administration, anything the government brings onto the table of legislators, it gets its signature. Critics often argue that the legislature often rubber stamps executive borrowing. How do you respond to this claim? And could you walk us through the process of scrutinizing some of these bills that come from the executive, especially when it comes to public accounting?
All right, let me lay this very important foundation, and that is the fact that when people see the parliament from outside, there are different kinds of expectations. For some people, the expectation is that the parliament, which is the legislative body, and the executive must not at any point have a convergence. In other words, there should be this constant brickbats. When the executive brings something, the House or the Parliament shoots it down, and so on. For some persons also, there should be a degree of engagement between the two arms of government in a manner that ensures that the principles of checks and balances, which the presidential system of government entails, is not lost. Now, it is to this second group that I think people like me belong. I do not think that it serves the people right for the executive and the parliament to be constantly on two parallel lines that do not meet. I do not think that is the intendment of the drafters of our constitution also, that whatever comes from the executive is shut down and there is delay and what have you. Now, having a meaningful engagement requires that there should be a very deep scrutiny of whatever proposal comes from the executive arm of government to the parliament. And to a very large extent, that happens even in the House of Representatives, at the moment. Now, the House works through the committee system.
Yes.
What most people see eventually is the final outcome of these processes in the plenary. Unfortunately, there is less coverage of committees, by the media in Nigeria. So there is a committee, for example, on loans and debts. There is a committee on finance. And these two committees, these very important committees, scrutinize details of borrowing plans that government brings. At times, the rigors, take so many days, so many weeks, at times so many months, before the final proposition now comes before the parliament. And because the parliament has entrusted some of its powers to the committees, it is not very sensible for us, even in the plenary, to begin to do that which the committees have done all over again. If we do that, then it means there is no essence for having the committees in the first instance. So most of the things that people see as and perceive as a rubber stamp is the work of the parliament in plenary, rather than the work of the parliament in committees, where a lot of scrutiny takes place, lot of engagement, asking of questions, looking through documents, interrogating officials of government on not only borrowing plans, but every other plan, including the appropriation, which is like the most important, money bill that comes before the parliament every year. Some committees take up to weeks looking at the proposals from a ministry, department, or agency of government before they bring that report to the plenary of the House of Representatives or the Senate, as the case may be. So, for those who think that the parliament just exists as a rubber stamp, I'm sorry to say that is not correct. That is not true. Yes, I agree we can do better. We can have, greater scrutiny. We can stand up, to ask some probing questions, especially at committee levels. We should do more diligent scrutiny of proposals in terms of bills, in terms of proposition. But I assure you, what happens in the House of Representatives is very, very far, from being a rubber stamp. There is a lot of interrogation, lot of examination, lot of probing into proposals brought by the executive, especially at the committee level, which is where the parliament actually does the work. The plenary is just, like they say, to fulfill all righteousness and ensure that the provision of the constitution is not breached before we make up, final approval.
Okay. I mean, since you've talked about the rubber stamp situation, therefore clarifying it, it's obvious that Nigerians should note that it is not a rubber stamp, right? If we put it that way. Rather, there are a lot of scrutinies that take place. And I like the fact that you said there's also room to do better. Maybe we would suggest to the Assembly that there should be more fuller coverage, especially the House of Representatives, fuller coverage of these committees whenever they deliberate, so that Nigerians can see the processes that take place. And I think it's very key. I mean, since we're talking to you, maybe it's a projection that should be pushed to the House. I mean, News Central will be more than glad to put that out so that people can watch live and get to really improve the trust deficit that is so common now. My next question would be on debt, because there's no way you will talk about having African nations gather together and not look at debt. I mean, we do understand that Egypt has the highest debt profile. So far, so good. They're indebted, the most indebted nation, according to research. And followed by, you have Cape Verde, you have Mozambique. And recently, Nigeria's debt profile hit about 149. And it's caused a lot of conversations in different quarters. People are saying, what are we borrowing for? What are we borrowing for? Can you expatiate on the conversations that you've had on WAPA concerning debt profile, Africa and its indebtedness, especially to maybe IMF, World Bank and the likes, and how is Africa going to remain sustainable and still try to pay these foreign debts?
Okay, absolutely. Any person of good conscience must be worried at the ballooning level of indebtedness in West Africa and Africa, as a whole. And of course, Nigeria is a very big part of Africa and the biggest economy in Africa with the largest population. Now, the question again is, when we talk about borrowing and indebtedness, we ask ourselves, is it something that can be absolutely avoided? And the question in most cases is no. And the examples that we all often give is even about those economies that are regarded as developed and doing very well today, have different levels of indebtedness to other nations and to multilateral bodies. So while agreeing that yes, because of the usual gap between available resources and target expenditure, there are usually need, to borrow. The question which bothers the mind of, or which should bother the mind of every person who is interested in these matters, is the sustainability of this debt, and to what purpose do we apply the monies borrowed. Now, I agree that because of the general lack of proper information and understanding, people do ask questions, what have we borrowed on? And we have had quite a number of reckless examples of borrowing in the last 30, 40 years, of our nation. We have, and this doesn't only have to do with the federal government. Even state governments, had borrowed money that, you ask, where exactly is this money going to? I have an example of a state in Nigeria that borrowed money, to do some rail project, some light rail project in 2011, 2012. And as we speak, it will interest you to know that that rail project has not gone up to 40%. And the money was borrowed and still being paid back with very high interest rate. We have so many instances like that. But we should not also take our eyes away from the fact that some of the borrowing that we have done as a nation, as the subnationals, have actually had impact. When people talk today about the Kaduna Abuja rail, it's a product of borrowing. It was implemented, executed, through a loan, from the Republic of China, and a few other infrastructure that we can point to are, funded through borrowing. We had the Sukuk borrowing, through which a few of our roads have been fixed in Nigeria, and so on and so forth. But can we really say that, you know, most of these borrowings have been justifiably expended? I will tell you, no. I am particularly worried at some of the things that we borrow for in most of our West African countries. And in this conference, some of these examples came up. You know, borrowing money to fund non-capital components of budget. You know, borrowing money to fund intangibles, things that you cannot actually put your hands to and track. And these are the things, when you borrow, it should be on capital projects that even have the potential of repaying back the money that you have borrowed. Now, exceeding the debt to GDP ratio is also another concern, which was raised in the conference, where most West African countries today are moving, you know, beyond the exceeding the debt to GDP ratio in a manner that will make it very difficult to be able to repay these loans within the time agreed, the time framework in the instrument of borrowing. Now, these are the things that we need to be concerned about. And when you come to the Parliament, now, the way the Parliament operates, especially the Public Account Committee, the Public Account Committee is mostly a post-expenditure committee, which looks at a government account after the fact, after the monies have been expended. But like I said earlier on, we have committees in the House that do the tracking of the actual expenditure, especially the Committee on Finance. And this is one of the charges that came out from this conference to the Parliament, from Sierra Leone, you know, to Ghana, to Ivory Coast, to Nigeria, to Cameroon, and every other participating countries, on the need for committees of the House to collaborate in this work to ensure that there is a real-time tracking of not only obtaining the loans, but expenditure pattern. What are we spending the money on, and how well are we also meeting up with the various timelines that the borrowers, the lenders, put in the various instruments for which we take the loans. These are the challenges, and we are hoping that at the end of this conference, each of the Parliament participating will have been strengthening our capacity to oversight public debt, so that in the next 10, 15, 20 years, we do not come back to a situation of the debt quagmire that we had in the 90s and late 80s.
I'm glad you and your colleagues across the West African sub-region are comparing notes and looking at how to strengthen oversight, and also looking at issues of transparency and accountability. Now, talking about transparency and accountability, you've been commended for recovering 61.5 billion naira from oil and gas firms. Can you walk us through how your committee achieved that, and what it reveals about Nigeria's fiscal leakages, and what lessons we could learn from this?
All right, let me put the facts more correctly. It's actually over 200 billion naira that was recovered through the activities of the Public Account Committee of the House of Representatives. And the background is that the Auditor General for the Federation, in his 2021 report on the account of the Federation, indicated a warning trend of monies owed by a number of oil and gas companies, which they ought to have paid into the Federation account, but for some other reasons are not paid. So when we got this information from the Auditor General for the Federation, we called for the details, and got the details both from the Auditor General for the Federation and from the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, NUPRC, and then began a process of engagement with these business concerns in the oil and gas sector. And I must say that we had quite a very good cooperation from a number of them, which resulted in the recovery of some of these monies. But as we speak, it will interest you to note that there are still some that have been very recalcitrant, you know, refusing to honor the obligations that they have under the law. You know, they are operating some of our, you know, oil fields and you know, owing monies on gas flaring, monies that they to pay on, you know, as licensees and so on, which they have still, you know, yet to pay. And there is also the bigger issue of remittances, especially from the biggest of them all, which is the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, NNPCL, which is going through a process of reconciliation of accounts running into trillions, of naira, which the Auditor General, found our monies outstanding to the Federation account to be paid by the NNPCL and a few of their other, operators. Now, that is one aspect of it. The second aspect of it has to do with an investigation which our committee carried out on the remitter. The remitter is the payment gateway which the federal government adopted upon the introduction of the Treasury single account, and there were allegations of revenue leakages through this platform, which has been established by the Public Account Committee of the House, running also into hundreds of billions of naira. In this investigation, a few of the operators, especially the commercial banks, have made refund to the recovery account of the federal government through the work of this committee. Remitter itself as an organization is still engaging with government. We have established against Remitter a liability of almost 300 billion naira to the federal government, which they are contesting, and which I believe that through a more rigorous process of reconciliation we will be able to resolve. We also had instances in the investigation of the COVID-19 expenditure, which this committee handled about 2 years ago. That was the first assignment we had, where we had some recoveries also from the COVID-19 investigation. There was a particular ministry, for example, that got a sum of 10 billion naira that they were to use for establishing a vaccine plant, a vaccine producing plant, and never spent that money and never reported that money back to government until the Public Account Committee came on, through the report of the Auditor General for the Federation, to ask for this money and recover this money back into the account of the federal government. Now, these are some of the things that we do, and we're adopting an approach that is very novel. That rather than just go on a scale of, okay, this person did something that is wrong, report them to the appropriate quarters, perhaps for prosecution, which is not an option that is out of it. We also see how much of recoveries we can make of some of these obligations, some of these monies, either misappropriated or withheld from government posts, in line with the additional powers given by the 10th House of Representatives to the Public Account Committee to investigate issues of diversion of revenue or non-adherence to financial regulations and laws governing public expenditure in Nigeria. So these are the efforts that are culminating in the recoveries that the House of Representatives is making at the moment. And we're not resting on our oars. We are continuing in the same light, to see how much ground we can cover in the next 2 years of the 10th House of Representatives.
I want to say thank you so much for speaking with us here on this interview. Most importantly, looking at the final day. And hopefully, like I've said throughout this week, I'll be using the word hopefully, that a lot will come out of it that would not just benefit Nigeria, but also will benefit Nigerians.
And congratulations
as well.
To the Nigerian House of Representatives for hosting, and we wish you happy deliberations. And we look forward to a report that will be put up after this conference and recommendations. Thank you so much for your time.